At 55 years old, I sat across from the man I'd built everything with and said the words that could destroy 23 years of partnership, friendship, and the only life that ever made sense. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. If you believe it's never too late to be honest, subscribe to this channel and share your story below. My name is Wendell Oakes, and for 23 years, I co-owned a land surveying firm in Duluth, Minnesota, with a man named Hartigan Cross. We called the company Oakes and Cross Land Services. It was printed on our trucks, our business cards, the sign outside our office on Superior Street downtown, our names side by side like they belonged together, which I suppose is the whole point of this story. I need to tell you how it started because the beginning matters. It was 1999 when I met Hartigan. I was 32. He was 30. We were both working for a larger surveying outfit based out of the Twin Ports area, trudging through frozen lots in January, marking boundaries for new developments creeping along the hillside above Lake Superior. Hartigan was the kind of man who made hard work look effortless. Broad shoulders, a calm voice, hands that were always steady on the equipment even when the wind off the lake was brutal. He had this way of squinting into the distance like he could see something nobody else could. I noticed it the first week we worked together. We became friends fast. Not the loud kind of friends. The quiet kind. The kind who eat lunch together without needing to fill every silence. The kind who stay late finishing a difficult parcel calculation just because the other one is still there. By 2001, we'd saved enough and built enough of a reputation to launch our own firm. It was terrifying and thrilling. We signed the lease on our first office, a narrow storefront on East 4th Street with radiators that clanked like percussion instruments. I remember the day we hung our sign. Hartigan stood on the sidewalk looking up at it, arms folded, and said, "Well, Wendell, guess we're stuck with each other now?" I laughed, but something in my chest pulled tight. See, I'd known something about myself for a long time, since I was maybe 15, 16 years old. Growing up in a small town outside of Hibbing, Minnesota, you didn't talk about it. You didn't even let yourself think about it for too long. I dated women in my 20s. I married one. Her name was Gail, and she was kind and practical, and I cared for her deeply. But there was always a distance between us that I couldn't explain to her. A wall I'd built without knowing the blueprints. Gail and I divorced in 1997, amicably. No children. She told me she hoped I'd find whatever I was looking for. I didn't know what that meant until I met Hartigan, but I never said a word. Not one word in 23 years. Here's why. Hartigan was not, as far as I ever knew, a man who was interested in other men. He dated women occasionally. Nothing serious that I ever saw, but enough to signal clearly where his attention went. And more importantly, he was my business partner. My closest friend, the person I spent more hours with than anyone else on earth. If I said something and it went wrong, I wouldn't just lose a friend. I'd lose my livelihood, my daily routine, the structure of my entire existence. Everything I'd built would crack down the middle like a surveyor's stake split by frost. So I kept quiet. Year after year after year, I want you to understand what that silence was like. It wasn't passive. It was active. Every single day, I made a choice. When Hartigan came in smelling like pine and cold air after a morning field survey, I chose silence. When he clapped me on the shoulder and let his hand rest there a beat too long, I chose silence. When we drove together to remote job sites and talked for hours about everything from Lake Superior ice formations to whether the Twins would ever win another pennant, I chose silence. 23 years of choosing. Our firm grew steadily. We hired a small crew, bought better equipment, moved to a nicer office on Superior Street with a view of the harbor. We became the go-to surveyors for residential and commercial projects all across St. Louis County and beyond. Hartigan handled most of the field work. I managed the office operations, the client relationships, the permits and filings. We complemented each other perfectly. People in Duluth knew us as a unit. Call Oakes and Cross, they'd say. At city council meetings, at contractor lunches, at the hardware store on 3rd Avenue West, we were a pair, inseparable in the professional sense, and in the personal sense, too, though I was the only one who knew the full depth of that. The thing that finally broke my silence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a near-death experience or a sudden revelation. It was a Tuesday in March. I was 55 years old. The lake was still frozen near the shore, and a hard gray sky pressed down on the city. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a plat map for a subdivision near Woodland, and Hardigan walked in with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe on Lake Avenue. He set one on my desk without asking. He always knew how I took it. Black, 1 sugar. He sat down in the chair across from me, the one clients usually used, and he said, "You know what I was thinking about this morning?" "What's that?" I said, not looking up. 23 years. That's longer than most marriages last. I looked up then. He was smiling, but there was something underneath it. Something searching. His eyes, which were the color of lake ice in late afternoon light, held mine for a moment longer than usual. "Guess we're doing something right," I said. He nodded slowly. "Guess we are." Then he got up and went to his own desk, and I stared at the plat map without seeing a single line on it for the next 40 minutes. That night, I went home to my apartment on Piedmont Avenue. I made dinner. I sat on my couch, and something inside me just broke open. Not violently, gently, like ice thinning on the harbor in April, cracking into pieces that drift apart so quietly you almost miss it happening. I was 55 years old. I had spent more than 2 decades loving this man in silence, and I realized, sitting there with a half-eaten bowl of soup cooling on the coffee table, that the silence hadn't protected me. It had hollowed me out. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and thought about every possible outcome. He says he doesn't feel the same way. We try to keep working together, but it's awkward, and within a year, one of us buys the other out. He says he's offended. He's angry. He never speaks to me again. He says he knew all along and was waiting for me to say something, that last possibility. I turned it over and over like a stone in my pocket. I decided I would tell him. Not that night, not impulsively, but soon. I gave myself 1 week. 7 days to find the right words, the right moment. 7 days to prepare for the possibility that I might lose everything. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Hardigan was carrying a secret of his own. And it was about to surface in a way that would change the entire calculus of my confession. 4 days into my self-imposed deadline, Hardigan didn't come to work. This was unusual. In 23 years, the man had missed maybe a dozen days total. He'd come in with bronchitis, with a sprained ankle, with a fever he swore was just allergies. So when 9 o'clock came and his desk was empty, I noticed immediately. I called his cell. No answer. I called again at 10. Nothing. By 11, I was considering driving to his house on 9th Street East, near Chester Park. But then my phone rang, and his name appeared on the screen. Wendell. His voice was strange. Flat. Hollow. "Where are you? You okay?" A pause. Long enough that I heard wind in the background, which told me he was outside somewhere. "I'm at the canal. Can you come down here?" "Right now?" "Yeah, right now." I grabbed my coat and drove the 7 minutes from our office to the Duluth Ship Canal. The lift bridge was up, letting a freighter pass through. I found Hardigan standing on the pedestrian walkway, hands deep in his pockets, watching the ship's hull slide past like a slow-moving wall of rust and paint. "What's going on?" I asked, stopping beside him. He didn't look at me for a long time. Then he said, "I got a call this morning from a clinic in Minneapolis. Some test results." My stomach dropped. "What kind of test results?" "Cardiac. I've been having some symptoms. Chest tightness. Shortness of breath on surveys. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry." He finally turned to face me. "They found a blockage. 2, actually. They want to do a procedure. Maybe surgery." The world went very still around us. The freighter's horn sounded deep and mournful, echoing off the concrete walls of the canal. "When?" I managed. "Next week. They said it's not immediately critical, but it needs to happen soon. They don't want to wait." I stood there, and everything I'd been planning to say, all my careful words about feelings and honesty and 23 years of silence, rearranged themselves in my mind, because suddenly the stakes were different. Suddenly time wasn't something I could spend carefully. It was something that might be taken away. "You should have told me about the symptoms," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I know." "How long?" 6 months. Maybe 8. 8 months of chest pain, and he'd said nothing. 8 months of climbing hills on job sites and catching his breath and hiding it from me. I felt a flash of anger, then realized how hypocritical that was. I'd hidden something from him for 23 years. I'll drive you to Minneapolis, I said. For the procedure, whatever you need. He looked at me with something like gratitude, but also something else. Something I couldn't quite read. You don't have to do that, Hartigan. Don't be ridiculous, he almost smiled. Okay. We drove back to the office together, leaving his truck at the canal parking lot. The ride was quiet except for the heater rattling. When we pulled into our spot behind the building, he put his hand on my forearm before I could open the door. Wendell, thank you. His hand was warm through my jacket sleeve. I looked at it, then at him. Of course, I said, that was Thursday. The procedure was scheduled for the following Wednesday at a hospital in downtown Minneapolis. I spent the weekend reorganizing our project schedule, delegating field surveys to our crew, making sure everything would run without both of us for at least a week. But underneath all that practical activity, my mind was running a different calculation entirely. I couldn't tell him before the surgery. That would be selfish, adding emotional pressure when he needed to be calm. But I also couldn't bear the thought of him going into that procedure without knowing that someone loved him. Not just as a friend, not just as a partner. Loved him completely. Monday morning, I was at my desk early. Hartigan came in at his usual time, looking tired but steady. He set a coffee on my desk. Black, 1 sugar. Got something for you, he said, and handed me a manila envelope. I opened it. Inside was a legal document. A transfer of ownership clause for the business, structured so that if anything happened to him during the procedure, his 50% would pass to me without probate complications. I stared at it. Hartigan, it's just practical, he said. Nothing's going to happen. But I want things to be clean, organized. I don't want to talk about this. I know, but we're businessmen, Wendell. We handle things. I put the envelope in my drawer and didn't look at it again, but it sat there like a weight, like evidence of something I wasn't ready to confront. We drove to Minneapolis on Tuesday afternoon. 5 hours on I-35 South, the landscape flattening out below the Iron Range, the last of winter's gray snow lining the highway. Hartigan was quiet for most of the drive. Somewhere past Hinckley, he turned down the radio and said something that made my pulse skip. You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't started the firm together? What do you mean? I mean, where we'd be. Who we'd be with. What our lives would look like. I try not to think about alternate timelines, I said carefully. I think about it sometimes. He was looking out the passenger window at the passing trees. I think about it more than I probably should. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. And what do you conclude? That I wouldn't trade it. His voice was quiet, almost tender. Not for anything. Something cracked open inside me again. That slow, warm fracturing. I kept my eyes on the road and said, me neither. We checked into a hotel near the hospital. 2 rooms side by side. That night, we ate dinner at a small restaurant on Nicollet Avenue. Nothing fancy. Burgers, beer for me, water for him because of pre-op instructions. We talked about easy things. A complicated boundary dispute we'd resolved the previous fall. The new transit development planned for Duluth's waterfront. Whether the ice on Lake Superior would break up early this year, but underneath the easy talk, there was a current running between us. A frequency I'd never noticed before, or maybe one I'd trained myself not to notice. The way he held eye contact a beat too long. The way he leaned forward when I spoke. The way when we walked back to the hotel, his shoulder brushed mine and neither of us moved away. At our doors, adjacent in the hallway, he paused with his keycard in hand. Wendell, yeah? He looked at me. Really looked at me, and I swear in that moment I saw everything. Every year, every silence, every almost, get some sleep, he said finally. Big day tomorrow. I lay awake half the night, my heart hammering against my ribs harder than any cardiac event could explain. The procedure was scheduled for 7 in the morning. I was in the waiting room by 6:30. They took him back, and I sat in an uncomfortable chair with a magazine I didn't read, and I bargained with the universe like I hadn't done since I was a child. Let him be okay. Let him come out of this. Give me the chance to tell him. 3 hours later, a surgeon appeared in the doorway. Mr. Oakes? He's asking for you. He was asking for me. Not a family member, not a friend back in Duluth. Me. I followed the surgeon down a bright corridor that smelled like antiseptic and found Hartigan in a recovery bay, pale under the fluorescent lights but awake, alert, and smiling slightly. "Went fine," he said. His voice was raspy. "2 stents. Good as new, they say." I sank into the chair beside his bed. "Good. That's good." "You look worse than I do," he said. "I feel worse than you do." He laughed softly, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. Hurts." I sat with him for 3 hours while he drifted in and out of sleep. Nurses came and went. Monitors beeped. And I watched him breathe, steady and strong, and I knew with absolute certainty that I could not keep my silence any longer, but not here. Not in a hospital bed. He deserved better than that. They released him the next afternoon with a stack of medication instructions and orders to rest for 2 weeks. I drove us back to Duluth, and this time Hartigan slept most of the way, reclined in the passenger seat with a small pillow wedged between his head and the window. I looked at him every few minutes. The lines of his face softened in sleep, the gray at his temples, the steady rise and fall of his chest. I loved him. I had loved him for more than 2 decades. And I was going to tell him. I just had to figure out when. And then something happened that took the choice right out of my hands. 2 weeks after the procedure, Hartigan was cleared for light activity. He came back to the office on a Monday, moving a little slower but looking healthier than he had in months. Color in his face, energy in his step. The stents were working. I had been waiting, watching, trying to find the perfect moment. But the truth is, there's no such thing as a perfect moment. There's only the moment you're brave enough to use. It came on a Saturday in April. The ice had finally broken on the harbor. You could hear it from the hillside, that deep grinding and cracking as the lake shrugged off winter. Hartigan and I had a tradition of hiking the Superior Hiking Trail section near Spirit Mountain on the first warm Saturday of spring. It was something we'd done for probably 15 years. This year, I almost canceled. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I knew. I knew that if we went, if we were out there together in the quiet and the trees and the big open sky, I would say it. The words were pressing against my throat like water against a dam, and I could feel the whole structure trembling. We met at the trailhead at 9 in the morning. The air was cold but bright, that particular North Shore clarity that makes everything look sharp-edged and new. Hartigan was wearing a blue flannel jacket I'd seen 100 times. He had a thermos of coffee. He looked happy. We hiked, slowly, because of his recovery. We talked about the upcoming season, the projects we'd lined up, a new housing development near Spirit Valley that would need boundary surveys. Normal things, easy things. About 2 miles in, we reached a rocky overlook where you could see the lake stretching out forever, silver and restless under the April sun. We sat on a flat boulder and Hartigan poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it to me. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Have I?" "Quieter than usual." "Which is saying something." He glanced at me sideways. "You worried about me?" "Because I'm fine." The doctor said, "It's not that." I took a breath. The coffee was hot in my hands. The lake was infinite below us. Well, it's partly that. But it's something else. He waited. Patient as he'd always been. 23 years of patience. I set the coffee down on the rock. I looked at the lake because I couldn't look at him. "Hartigan, I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago. Maybe years ago. Maybe decades ago. And I need you to hear me out before you say anything." Silence. Then quietly. "Okay. When you went in for that procedure and I was sitting in that waiting room, I realized something. Or rather, I admitted something I've always known. I forced myself to turn and face him. His expression was open, still, watchful. "I love you. Not just as my partner, not just as my friend. I'm in love with you. I have been since, God, I don't even know when it started. It just always was. And I know this might change everything between us, and I'm prepared for that. But I couldn't carry it silently anymore. Not after almost losing you." The words hung in the cold air between us. I watched his face for horror, for confusion, for the careful blankness of a man trying to figure out how to let someone down gently. What I saw instead was something I never expected. His eyes filled with tears, not sadness, not shock, something else entirely. He looked away toward the lake and pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. When he dropped it, his jaw was tight with emotion. "Wendell," he said. "You idiot. What?" He turned back to me, and he was laughing now, incredulous, his eyes wet. "You absolute idiot. You think I don't know? You think I haven't—" He stopped, took a breath, started again. "Do you think a man builds a life with someone for 23 years, turns down every relationship that comes his way, names that person in his will, hands him ownership papers before surgery, because of a business arrangement?" My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingers. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you too. I'm saying I've loved you for so long I don't remember what it felt like before. I'm saying I never told you because I thought—" His voice cracked. "I thought you'd never feel the same. You were married once. You never said anything. I thought I was imagining what I saw in you. You weren't imagining it. Apparently not." We sat there on that cold rock, above the lake, in the bright, merciless April light, and we looked at each other like two men seeing each other for the first time after 23 years of standing side by side. "We wasted a lot of time," I said. "Did we, though?" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "We built a life together. A good one. We just didn't call it what it was." He was right. In so many ways, we'd been partners in every sense, except the one we'd both been too afraid to name. The daily coffee, the shared silence, the way we structured our whole existence around each other without ever acknowledging why. I reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine immediately, like they'd been waiting for exactly this. His grip was strong, steady, warm despite the cold air. "So what now?" I asked. "Now we stop being idiots," he said. I laughed. He laughed. And then he leaned forward and kissed me, brief and firm, his cold nose against my cheek, his hand tightening on mine. It was the simplest thing in the world, and it was everything. We hiked back down the trail together. Same path we'd always taken, same trees, same stones underfoot. But the world had shifted on its axis. Everything looked different, brighter, more real. In the days that followed, we figured things out slowly. There was no rush. We'd waited 23 years. We could afford to be deliberate about what came next. We told our small office crew, who responded with the kind of unsurprised acceptance that told me we'd been far less subtle than we thought. Kenny, our senior field technician, actually said, "Finally," and went back to his sandwich. We told a few close friends. My sister in Hibbing, who cried happy tears and said she'd always wondered. Hardigan's brother in Wisconsin, who was quiet for a moment and then said, "Good. You deserve to be happy." We didn't make a public announcement. In a city like Duluth, where everybody knows everybody's business within about 36 hours, we didn't need to. We just started being ourselves, together, in public and in private. Hardigan moved in with me on Piedmont Avenue that summer. Or rather, he gradually migrated one box at a time until his house on 9th Street was empty and our apartment was full. His books next to mine, his coffee mug in the dish rack, his boots by the door. Things that had always belonged together, finally in the same place. Our business didn't suffer. If anything, it got better. There was an ease between us now, a fluency that came from having no more secrets. We'd always communicated well, but without the constant low hum of unspoken feelings taking up bandwidth, we were sharper, more efficient, more in sync. That first summer together, properly together, was the happiest of my life. We hiked every weekend. We took the firm's boat out on the lake. We sat on our small balcony in the long June evenings and watched the oar boats move through the harbor, and we talked about everything and nothing, the way we always had. Except now, when the conversation lulled, he'd reach for my hand. Or I'd lean against his shoulder. Small things. Enormous things. In August, we drove up to Grand Portage for a long weekend. Stood at the shore of Lake Superior, where the water is so clear you can see 20 feet down. Hardigan turned to me and said, "I want to do this for another 23 years. At least." "Your heart's going to have to cooperate," I said. "My heart's been cooperating since 1999. It's the rest of me that took a while." I pulled him close. The lake stretched out before us, vast and ancient and patient. It had been there for 10,000 years, holding its shape, waiting for nothing. We didn't have that luxury. We were human, finite, limited. But we had right now. And right now was more than enough. Looking back, I don't regret the years of silence as much as you might expect. I regret the fear, certainly. I regret the loneliness that came with it. But I don't regret the life we built during those years because it was real and it was good, even incomplete. We were learning each other, deepening something that would have to hold weight eventually. And when the moment finally came, it held. If you're listening to this and you're carrying a similar silence, I won't tell you it's easy to break it. It isn't. I won't tell you it'll always turn out the way mine did. It might not. But I will tell you this. The silence costs more than you think. It costs more every year. And at 55, looking back at all those years of quiet wanting, I can say with certainty that the risk of speaking is worth it. Even if the answer isn't what you hope for, the freedom of honesty is its own reward. But in my case, the answer was everything I'd hoped for. We're 57 and 55 now. Still running Oaks and Cross Land Services. Still drinking coffee together every morning. Still hiking the Superior Hiking Trail on the first warm Saturday of spring. The sign still hangs outside our office on Superior Street. Our names side by side like they